3 weeks ago, a Walmart in East Oakland shut its doors without warning. No press release, no liquidation banners, no "thank you for your loyalty" message. Just a single sheet of paper taped to the glass that read, "Closed permanently." Inside, the shelves were already stripped. The lights were off. The parking lot was empty. The employees learned the truth the same day as the customers. And here is the most important part. This is not an isolated story. This is not a single bad location. This is not one company making a one-off decision. This is a pattern, and it is accelerating. Over the past 18 months, some of the largest retail chains in the United States have been quietly pulling out of California's major cities. Walmart, Target, CVS, Walgreens, even Whole Foods. Not small businesses, not fragile startups, but some of the most sophisticated corporations on Earth, with entire departments dedicated to risk modeling and long-term planning. When companies like these walk away from some of the richest urban markets in the world, it means something fundamental has broken. San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, Sacramento. The exits are concentrated there, but smaller cities like Fresno and Stockton are starting to see the same pattern. In many cases, workers show up for their shift and discover the doors are locked. In others, they receive a short email and a minimal severance package. For the neighborhoods left behind, the consequences are immediate. These stores were not just places to buy snacks or clothes. They were the main source of affordable groceries, medicine, and basic household goods. When they disappear, entire districts become what urban planners call access deserts. Not just food deserts. Access deserts. Places where daily life becomes more expensive, more complicated, and more fragile. Publicly, the companies say very little. Press statements use vague phrases like changing market conditions or performance challenges. But privately, in investor briefings and insurance filings, a very different story appears. A story told in numbers. And those numbers no longer work. Behind the scenes, executives are looking at 5 forces that are all rising at the same time. Any one of them would be manageable. Together, they make normal retail operations mathematically impossible. The first force is organized retail theft. This is not casual shoplifting. This is coordinated, industrial-scale extraction. Groups enter stores, fill carts with high-value items, and leave in minutes. Electronics, cosmetics, over-the-counter medicine, baby formula, products that can be resold immediately. California's legal framework changed the risk equation years ago. When penalties for theft under a certain threshold were reduced, professional theft networks adapted faster than anyone expected. Store policies now instruct employees not to intervene. Not because they don't care, but because liability and safety rules make confrontation too expensive. In some locations, inventory losses now exceed 5% of total sales. For a business that survives on thin margins, that alone is a death sentence. But theft is only the beginning. The second force is insurance. Retail stores cannot legally operate without it. Property insurance, liability, theft. Workers' compensation. As incidents increased, insurers raised premiums dramatically. In many cases, they didn't just raise prices, they refused to renew coverage at all. Once a store becomes uninsurable, the decision is no longer strategic. It is mechanical. The store must close. Several California closures have happened for this reason alone. The third force is cost structure. California is one of the most expensive places in the world to operate any labor-intensive business. Wages are higher. Benefit mandates are broader. Compliance requirements are stricter. Real estate costs are among the highest in North America. Utilities, taxes, maintenance, security, logistics, all higher. Retailers tolerated this for decades because the volume made it worthwhile. Now the volume is gone, but the costs remain. And when you combine theft losses, insurance instability, and structural expense, the spreadsheet turns red very quickly. This is the point where companies stop talking about fixing bought-on stores and start talking about exiting markets. And that is exactly what is happening, but we are still only halfway through the story. Because the most dangerous part is not what has already closed. It is what this process is about to trigger. The fourth force is regulation, not any single rule, not any single requirement, but the cumulative weight of hundreds of them. Environmental standards, energy mandates, waste handling procedures, labor scheduling rules, reporting obligations, documentation requirements. Each one can be defended individually. Together, they form a permanent administrative tax on operations. Large corporations can manage this, but only if the core business is profitable. Once margins turn negative, regulation does not just add cost. It becomes a multiplier on losses. The fifth force is demographic and economic drift. Middle-income families have been leaving many California urban centers for years. Higher-income consumers, the ones who buy higher-margin products, are increasingly suburban or out of state. What remains is a customer base with less discretionary spending power. This changes everything about the business model. The average transaction gets smaller, the product mix shifts, security costs rise, shrinkage rises, and suddenly a store that worked for 20 years stops working in 12 months. Corporate finance teams do not argue with politics. They argue with arithmetic. And the arithmetic now says, close the store. Retailers tried everything before reaching this point. More guards, locked shelves, reduced hours, fewer products, different layouts. Nothing reversed the trend. So now we are entering the second phase of the crisis. The phase where closures stop being isolated and start becoming systemic. To understand what comes next, it helps to think in scenarios. In the best case, political leadership recognizes that the retail ecosystem is a piece of critical infrastructure. Not a luxury, not a convenience, infrastructure. That would mean restoring meaningful deterrence against organized theft, stabilizing insurance markets, reducing regulatory friction, and acknowledging that the current model is collapsing. If that happened quickly, some closures might pause, some locations might reopen, the damage could be contained. But time matters. And the window is closing. The base case is simpler and more likely. Closures continue at the current pace. A dozen here, a dozen there, every quarter. Retail chains consolidate into fewer, more defensible locations. Urban neighborhoods lose big box retail entirely. Suburban stores remain, but with shorter hours and limited selection. Access deserts expand. Residents travel farther. Prices rise. Small independent shops try to fill the gap, but they cannot match the purchasing power or logistics of national chains. The poor pay more. The vulnerable travel farther. And the damage spreads. Strip malls lose anchor tenants. Property values fall. Commercial mortgages weaken. Local tax revenues shrink. City budgets tighten. Services get cut. And the spiral feeds on itself. Some districts reach a tipping point where not just retail, but almost all private investment stops. The worst case is more extreme, but not theoretical. In that scenario, major chains don't just close individual stores. They abandon entire regions. Northern California, the Bay Area, parts of Los Angeles. When that happens, the secondary effects become financial, not just commercial. Banks holding retail property debt take losses. Some properties default. Development stops. Entire commercial corridors go dark. Employment collapses in clusters. Tens of thousands of workers lose jobs in the same economic zones. Local unemployment spikes. Social services are overwhelmed. Access to basic goods becomes a logistical problem, not just an inconvenience. Pharmacies disappear. Grocery options shrink to a few distant locations. Families drive 40 minutes for routine shopping. Those without cars simply cannot. Delivery services stop serving certain areas. Insurance won't cover drivers. Risk models say no. The digital divide becomes physical. This is not unprecedented. Other American cities have lived through similar retail collapses before. And when it happens, rebuilding does not take years. It takes decades. Not all of California would look like this. But some neighborhoods absolutely could. And the difference between these outcomes is not abstract. It will be decided by policy choices made in a very short time window. Which brings us to the part of the story that affects you directly. If you live in California or care about someone who does, there are signals you should already be watching. Store hours shrinking, more shelves behind glass, empty sections that never seem to refill. These are not temporary supply problems. They are early-stage retreat signals. Retailers almost never announce closures far in advance. By the time you hear official news, the decision is already final. That means preparation is no longer optional. It is practical. Know where you actually buy essentials, not where you prefer to go, where you truly depend on, and know what your alternatives are. Diversify your options before you are forced to. Do not panic buy. Do not hoard. but maintain a buffer. Time is the real resource in disruptions. A small buffer buys you time. Pay attention to local government meetings, not national politics. Local. Zoning, policing priorities, retail policy. These decisions matter more than people think. Retailers watch them closely. Support businesses that are still committed to your community, especially those that employ locally and reinvest locally. Where you spend money is not neutral, it is a vote. If you have elderly neighbors or family members with limited mobility, talk to them now, not later. Make contingency plans before systems break, not after. And understand this, not everyone has access to online alternatives. No stable internet, no credit card, no safe delivery address. Retail collapse always hits the poorest first and the hardest. Document what you see, closed stores, shortened hours, empty malls, share it with local journalists and community groups. Visibility matters. Silence protects inertia. Do not assume that because something is open today, it will be open next month. This is not panic. This is realistic planning in a system that is visibly under stress. Now let's say this clearly. What is happening in California is not a random fluctuation. It is not a temporary downturn. It is a structural failure of the retail model in specific environments. And when the retail model breaks in the wealthiest state in the country, it can break anywhere. Other states are already watching. Some are already changing policies specifically to avoid this outcome. So here's the real question. If major retailers abandon your area, what replaces them? Do you have alternatives? Can you reach them? Can you afford them? And more importantly, what are you willing to demand from the people who set the rules? Because hoping this fixes itself is not a strategy, it is a delay. Markets do not self-correct when legal, insurance, and cost structures are all pointing in the same direction. They unwind. We are watching that unwind happen in real time. And it will not stop without deliberate intervention. If you want to understand what is really happening to the American economy beneath the headlines and why stories like this are going to become more common, then this is exactly what we analyze here. Subscribe to Rachel Adams Reports. Not for panic, not for noise, but to stay ahead of what is actually coming. Because the stores are closing, the shelves are thinning, and the decisions driving it are not being explained honestly anywhere else. California is not an exception. It is the preview.